Hello, everyone. My name is Brenda Wanjiru. I'm from Kenya, and I will be your instructor for the day. I am currently an honorable member of the African Union Africa Platform on Children Affected by Conflict, and one of the subjects we'll be handling today will be human rights and humanitarian law in Africa. Welcome. Get yourself something to drink, get yourself something to write, settle down, and we can start. Okay? Okay, so first things first. What comes to your mind when you hear human rights? What comes to your mind when you hear humanitarian law? Human rights, basically, forgive me for that, human rights basically deals with the rights pertaining to your human self. Now, they are classified into ECOSOC rights, this economic, social, and cultural rights, and we have both civic and political rights. Now, let me get my notes ready. So economic rights include right to go to work, right to a safe working environment, right to an equitable or equal pay, depending on where you work. Social rights, including you being able to maybe go out and enjoy yourself, have time away from work just to rejuvenate yourself and enjoy your life outside work. While cultural rights also support your social rights, this includes the right to visit museums, to showcase your culture, and to be able to learn other people's cultures. Now, civic rights, on the other hand, pertain to your life, with the main one being, of course, right to life. And political rights include right to vote. Now, what is the difference when it comes to, for example, you have heard people saying that some rights are not pure rights, or to say that you can only enjoy them to a certain extent. It is true that you cannot enjoy all the rights to its entirety. And a very good example would be the right to life. This includes that sometimes you may have to give up your right, in quotes, to the government to be able to protect you as a citizen of that country, or in some other cases, another citizen of a different country, but in that specific country. What is an example? For example, the right to life, protection of Nigerians in Nigeria, and protection of other Africans in Nigeria. Even if you have the right to defend your life, there are to some extent, you may have to give it up to the state because they are in charge of security of that country, of your safety, and to ensure your well-being is protected. That is a very good example of a right that you cannot enjoy to its entirety. A second example would be if we may use this current decade that we are experiencing terrorism. So sometimes, depending on some states, the right to life may be revoked once you are found guilty of threatening one's life. For example, if you are deemed a terrorist, a person of suspicious character, or a threat to the national security. In that way, the host nation has the right to revoke your protection or protective rights, and they have the mandate to go to the extreme to protect their citizens. Now, I understand that this is debatable because at the end of the day, every life is important. But in such debates, you must be able to understand the question of whose right to life is more important than the other. A second or third example, I may not remember, a third example where you may have to give up the right to life is if it concerns your health. A very good example would be pregnancy. Let's say a woman is pregnant, but the specific pregnancy at hand threatens her life. Maybe it may make her paralyzed, it may disable her, or it may, at the end of the day, cause her life to end. At this specific point in time, the doctors have the option or give you the option on whose life to save. Would you pick yours as the mother or pick the baby's at the end of the day? In such instances, you are allowed to be able to choose whichever life to save and whichever not to save. That's the first example. Now, when it comes to humanitarian law in Africa, to bring out the difference between human rights and humanitarian law, Humanitarian law pertains majorly to the protection, the implementation of human rights in conflict setups. A very good example, we can start with right to health. So there is a there's a very big difference between how you achieve and implement your human rights pertaining to health in a peace setup and how you would implement the same right in a conflict setup. What are the major differences? We could say when you're in a peaceful setup, you have the option of going to the hospital by yourself, getting a consultation with a doctor, and awaiting the diagnosis or medicine, depending on what you have gone to. But in a humanitarian setup, it is an emergency, which means half the time we are rushing not only to save, but protect these lives. The other differences that may be included in humanitarian law are, we could include, for example, prisoners of war. Despite the fact that they are prisoners of war, they do still have their rights as human, right to protection, right to life. Where humanitarian law comes in now, it is from a global perspective in the sense that not only is your government, if there are two states that are fighting, for example, an apple and an orange. Now, if prisoners of war are from a particular fruit, the other, the capturing state has the mandate and is also responsible for the rights of this, for the lives of this prisoners of war. If, for example, they end up neglecting the lives of these prisoners of war or go to the extreme of executing them, then the whole world, the international community, can be able to come to them and question their motives, and depending on the judicial process, whoever is wrong could go to jail. That is the difference between human rights and humanitarian law. Sorry, I completely forgot to change the slide, but we'll continue. I would like to continue with a few examples of human rights that we have experienced. We have talked about the right to life and liberty. Some would say that there is a very huge difference between right to life and liberty. We usually like to say it depends on the community at hand, because sometimes, for example, if we look at prisoners in any prison in life, they do experience, they have, they are experiencing their right to life. They have the right being implemented by the state at hand, but they do not enjoy the right to liberty. Why? Because they are at a confined environment due to the wrongs that they have committed. Right to life and right to liberty is usually, they're codependent, but they also depend on the status of the society that you are in. Two is protection from slavery and torture. Again, every single state in the world has its own meaning of slavery and torture. There are some communities that you may see, certain actions may seem as normal, while in other states, this exact same actions seem as torture. However, universally, we can agree that when it comes to slavery and torture, the element of excruciating and involuntary pain must exist. How is this so? Since we are looking at the African continent, we could take colonialism as a very good example. And by this, I would like to specifically state colonial punishments. We could see this through flogging of natives, their right to life sometimes being taken, them being confined in solitary, them being put in solitary confinement, food being taken away, women being sexually abused, things like that. That is slavery and torture. I, however, want to remind you that when it comes to slavery and torture, it does not only stick to the physical, but the mental. Now, I understand that I have said that slavery and torture must include an element of pain, but in this new age, that we understand how psychology and mental health plays a role, we also understand that sometimes slavery and torture does not have to be physical. What are some of the mental tortures, for example, that one may go through? Solitary confinement is a very good example. The fact that you are put in a room where you cannot hear any sound and you have only your thoughts to yourself is damaging not only to your physical well-being, but to your mental and emotional well-being. That could be put under slavery and torture. Others in today's example could include not having the right to vote. Now, not only is this being stopped physically to vote, but for example, depending on the state and the community at hand, the removal or the not putting polling stations in those communities, not giving civic education, or in instances, we could say completely removing them from the community as if they don't exist. Now, why we put this as slavery and torture is because it plays into your mental and psychological well-being, where a member of the community may constantly keep asking myself, aren't I a citizen of this country? By virtue of the fact that you have been discriminated and put aside from everyone else, then this may also be included as a form of slavery and torture. Third example, freedom of opinion and freedom of expression. Now, I understand that this specific right and freedom is quite debatable, again, depending on the state. Why this is so? One, we have the political setup at play. Two, we have the gender roles at play. And three, we have the religious role at play. Now, it is agreed that one has the right to say whatever it is that is in their mind, heart, and soul. But we also have to agree that whatever comes out of your mouth should not be demeaning the human being next to you or the people you are talking to. Now, why this specific right and freedom is very debatable is all communities are different. And the major bone of contention is usually in the phrase that, can we accept who we are and can we accept who others are? Now, this question is very hard to answer because most of the times, as citizens of your specific country or of this continent, we seek to be understood by others, but we do not want to understand them. Now, a very good example would be when we look at our political rights. My internet seems unstable. I hope that we got that. A very good example of limitations when it comes to freedom of opinion and expression would be when it comes to political rights. Now, in our setup as Africa, we are allowed, yes, to voice our concerns, our opinions, who we would like to vote for or who we wouldn't like to vote for. Unfortunately, that same structure of sentence may get us into trouble. Why this is so is because such rights and freedoms are not actually absolute rights and freedoms. Most of the times, our society is not ready to allow others to voice their opinions, and two, we're not ready to listen to other people's opinions. We could also see this aside from the political setup when it comes to budgeting. Most of our citizens in the continent, one, are unaware of the financial laws, not only in their states, but in the continent. Unfortunately, should you decide to voice out your opinion specifically to a particular office, then the state, for example, may use its security personnel to come to you, not only to minimize your use of that expression, but also to put in fear to everyone else who is listening to you in order to refute, refuse, damage, or destroy whatever it is that you were trying to put forth. A very good example that we are currently seeing, West Africa, is a very good example of this. We are currently seeing a lot of citizens not being allowed to enjoy this freedom of opinion and expression, particularly in Nigeria. We can see it not only in its physical sense as what is happening now, me speaking to you using my mouth, but also online. there are certain situations that global social media companies have been used to sanitize a few of the major, if I may put major in quotes, major citizens in particular states pertaining to, for example, right now we can see elections, matter to do again with financial laws, or maybe influence particular lawmakers, decision makers to sway in a particular direction. I hope that we were able to understand the opinion of expression. And lastly, work and education. Now, when it comes to work and education, this specifically fall under ECOSOC rights. When we look at work, the working environment, there are very many rights that can fall under it. First and foremost is you have the right to work. It should not be mandatory, as if you are, the difference between right to work and it slipping into slavery or torture is what differentiates is choice. Are you able to decide that you want to work, where you want to work, and how you want to work? If there are no's on all those questions, then we may say that it borders on slavery and torture. Why is this so? If you are given the right to work, you get to decide what kind of work you want to do, how you want to do this work, and how you will be reimbursed. However, there are some instances where you cannot completely control your work environment. If I may use the example of security personnel, particularly defense forces around the continent, there are situations you may not be able to control. And I also would like to bring in the issue of right to life. There are situations where you may not be able to control. For example, you are in the field, the day looks clear, and all of a sudden you are ambushed. Now, at that particular point in time, you have no right to be able to say, I want to work in this specific environment. This is how I want to achieve this specific task. Why this is so? Because at the moment you are being attacked and your focus is not only to stop the ambush, but to be able to save enough lives to be able to go back to camp. However, in peaceful setups, as we are currently seeing right now, not only have the right to be able to choose your environment, but your employer also has the responsibility to give you a safe, happy, and peaceful environment. The United Nations has already given out its guidelines on providing this kind of environment for your employees. Now, why this is important, again, if I may bring in health rights, is because at the end of the day, your mental health is more important than anything. No one wants to go to work to a stressful environment, and no one wants a horrible boss. Horrible bosses and stressful work environments reduce your productivity and may even make some sink into depression. Now, why it is important for you to be able to understand and fight for this particular right, again, is not only for yourself, but also for the community at hand. Why this is so is because you are able to achieve and implement consumer rights. Now, consumer rights sounds like a new word. Consumer rights, for example, would be for persons who need to wear protective gear. A very good example is what we saw during the COVID-19 pandemic. Is that protective gear that you're being given safe? Is it sanitized? Is it clean? Or would it increase your chances of getting COVID-19? Or would it increase the chances of someone next to you being infected by the virus? Now, if your own employer, whether by person or by organization, is not able to protect you, then that means the whole setup is affected, which not only affects you as a person, but the organization and the country as a whole. The second right when in this particular setup, when it comes to education, again, education is a very broad term. We may look at it from the point of view of the normal formal education, where you go to class, finish your elementary, high school, and go to the university. But then there's the non-informal education that is currently being meted out. This is a very good example. Or two, when it comes to civic education that is being provided either by the government of the day or the national, the NGOs that are currently present. Why rights to education is important is because not only does it increase the amount of, I'm sorry, my train of thought is lost. For some reason, I'm thinking of food. Why right to education is important is also because you're implementing the right to information. Now, again, as we stated earlier, not every right is absolute. Because when it comes to right in education and information, there are certain information that cannot be given out to the public. The first one would be, of course, matters pertaining to national security, or two, if we would put it in the judicial setup, matters pertaining to marriage or children. Why this is so is because a lot of this information is sensitive information. If I may use the example of the courtroom setup, when it comes to defilement cases, most of these cases are in a closed courtroom setup. Why this is so is because one, we want to protect the dignity of the child who is harmed, and two, we want to protect the dignity of the parents who may have been affected psychologically and mentally by the specific act at hand. Two, when it comes to matters of national security, I think that is obvious. No one wants to let out, excuse me for that, no one wants to let out the secrets of their country to their enemy. If that is so, then that means that you are vulnerable and that you may be hit at, from any corner. So we were talking about education. Not only when we speak about education, not only are we talking about giving books to children to read, not only publishing books or giving teachers the opportunity to teach or paying them, it is also about the quality of education being given. Now, when we look at education, we must refrain from looking at it from the classroom point of view. We must be able to look outside the classroom. One, are these children actually ready to go to class? When we ask if these children are ready, not only are we looking at the financial status, not only are we looking at their housing status, but again, we are also looking at what happens at home. Where is this child from? Now, currently, the African Union and the United Nations is trying to push for teachers to be education ambassadors and to move from the classroom to the home. Now, what this means is that the teachers will be able to get the chance to go to at least some of their students' home to sit down with their parents and find out who is this child away from school. This is very important as most of the times teachers are able to pick up on the, if I may put it that way, the side person of the student. A lot of the students come to class, for example, are hyperactive. And in the society, we may look at this child as a hyperactive child, but a teacher is able to tell that this child is not happy. Two, when it comes to prevention of sexual abuse, the reporting of sexual abuse and the stopping of sexual abuse, teachers are able to pick out this information firsthand. Why this is so, children seem to be more open to their teachers. They seem to be more trusting of their teachers. Forgive me for that. And thus the classroom stops becoming a place of learning and a place of comfort and safety. This is why when it comes to right to education, not only are we looking at the quality or quantity of education being given, but the person as a whole. Last but not least, as we try and make teachers as ambassadors of education, we also need to look at their background life away from school. Are they happy? Are they experiencing something away from home? Are they stressed out? Why this is important is because teachers teach who they are. An unhappy teacher creates unhappy students. Okay, moving to the next slide. Oh, wow. Yes, I think I talked about that. So the African Charter on Human and People's Rights has All these rights that we have been talking about, not only ECOSOC rights, but political and civic rights. It is a document that is currently ratified in almost 3/4 of the states, of the member states of the African Union, and is actually being implemented on the community basis. Other regional economic communities have their own specific charters. For example, we have the ECOWAS Bill of Rights that deals with ECOWAS member states. ECOWAS member states, for those who may not be aware, are member states in the West African region. ECOWAS Child Policy that is specific to children's rights, and the SADC Social Rights Charter, which is under the member states of the Southern African Development Community. The East Africa Community currently has the East Africa Treaty, but in addition to other treaties that are currently being implemented, for example, the child protection policies. The African Union Charter that I have highlighted there is specific to rights pertaining to youth. Different dockets with each to forgive me, I think my internet is unstable. I'm not sure if I am back. Each of these economic communities has their own economic high court, if I may put it that way, that caters to the member states of that specific community. Now, I would like to say beforehand that there is the African Court, which is situated in Arusha. Now, why we call it the African Court is because it handles all human rights matters in all African Union member states. Arusha is also home to the East African Court of Justice. And as we continue, we have the ECOWAS Court of Justice, which is situated in Abuja. As I said, the East African Court of Justice, which is also in Arusha, and the SADC community, which was in Namibia, but is currently suspended. As we continue with the screen, now, we have currently learned about the human rights that one has that should be implemented, that are currently being implemented, but we would also like to highlight the human rights violations that are currently going on in the continent. Now, before I start this, I would like to put it before you that a lot of African states are currently experiencing, depending on the height of the conflict, war, political clashes, ethnic cleansing to some extent, and political instability. Now, why we have put this specific examples before you is just to show you how each party in a particular state plays in not only in bringing this violation to life, but also how citizens may be unknowingly playing a role in its continuity. The first example I would like to use is abductions. We are currently seeing that in the Nigeria and Lake Chad basin. Now, if we may look at the specific countries that are surrounding the Lake Chad basin, we realize that with the exception of Nigeria, they are all experiencing conflict that is bordering war, if we may put it that way. Why I have put Nigeria on the side is because Nigeria is being looked as under a terrorist situation, which is also conflict. But the major difference with this is the violations that are currently on hand. Now, the member states around the Lake Chad basin, the governments of the member states in the Lake Chad basin, excuse me, are being accused of not being able to protect their citizens and turning a blind eye in continuing the current conflict. Now, with the kidnapping at hand, I think we have all seen this on Twitter, and not only in the Lake Chad basin, but if we could include Cameroon at hand. So bad is the situation that at times we are seeing online that people are actually preparing themselves to be kidnapped, and that there is a sort of informal, if we may say, fund that families are currently putting in place to protect their loved ones, and in case one of them is being abducted, to pay for it. So if we may call it an informal insurance fund that is currently being witnessed not only in the Lake Chad Basin, but also in Cameroon. All these countries are currently experiencing conflict. 2, detention without trial. This is usually politically motivated, as I have said. And as we remember our examples previously on how current state governments may use this as a situation where they may want to silence particular citizens for speaking out against the government of the day. What we have come to realize is a lot of the themes are usually under the financial laws and political freedom. We have had some being kidnapped but being found alive later on. But unfortunately, for most of them, lives are lost. And most of these governments do not seem like they want to deal with the situation or bringing the perpetrators to justice. Unfortunately, we also have to come to terms with the fact that in as much as we would like to call the citizens collectively to stand up for themselves, we also have to look at the person from an individual level. For example, no one wakes up one day and wants to put their family in harm's way. This is, I would say, something that may be hard to reconcile because you're dealing with two situations here. At the end of the day, who are you going to choose? Who are you going to protect? Will you die for your country or will you go home and protect your family? When we look at political executions, this is currently 1st of August 2022. I think we spent most of June and July learning about the situation in the Gambia with Mr. Ebrima Solo, may his soul rest in peace, that came to life, what is being termed as political execution. Just like detentions without trial, the state of the day may seem to have a hand in it. Most of the times they have been accused, and a lot of the times they have been found guilty of trying to silence citizens, not only of that country, but of other countries who come into the host country and quote unquote try to ruin their name. We can also see the specific action going on in the Central African Republic and Angola. When we talk about torture, as we had stated before, that not only is torture physical, but mental. If we may use as an example that were going on, my internet may be unstable. I'm not sure if you'll be able to get this, but certain acts of torture included, as I said before, being put in solitary confinement, being put in extremely silent rooms, which not only plays with your mental health, but your physical health, or 3, being excommunicated from your particular society. Now, what this does is not only does it deteriorate your health, but it also forces you to keep quiet about the specific thing that you were talking about or fighting for, that not only ends up bringing more harm to the community in future, but in some instances may lead to death. Unfortunately, for such situations, even if the perpetrators are known by face, by name, they may be unable to be arrested and taken to court most of the times because the victims are afraid or they have their lives threatened, and thus the court may, the situation may not get to the courtroom. Last but not least, we have war crimes. This includes sexual abuse, killing and maiming, and the recruitment and use of child soldiers. When it comes to sexual abuse, first of all, I need us to understand that this new decade, millennium, the new acts of war include sexual abuse as a form of silencing and ethnic cleansing. Now, when we look at genocide studies, we understand that sexual abuse not only plays a role in damaging the family setup, but also destroying the individual person who has been sexually abused. A very good example currently is we can see that in, the Central African Republic, Mali, and the DRC. Now, what happens is we have this men perpetrators. For example, if we may start with men as an example, so we have these perpetrators who come in and see women of a certain village, and not only do they sexually abuse them, but there have been very, very many accounts of that happening in front of their family members. When this specific accounts are being taken to be able to follow up on the matter and bring justice to life, we see that these family members are unable to deal with the trauma that they saw. And why this is so, for example, we see fathers not wanting such cases going to court because they cannot reconcile their wife or their daughters being sexually abused. Not only that, but being sexually abused in front of them. There was a specific example whereby we had a father who had committed suicide because he could not handle the trauma that he saw of his wife and his daughters being sexually abused by soldiers, both of the state and peacekeepers, doing it in front of their children. If I may move this conversation to the side again, there is an alarming rate of a lot of accusations are piling up of soldiers of the specific state in war and peacekeepers actually sexually abusing the victims that they are supposed to protect. Now, this is very saddening, and it is also very worrying because we have situations where we're currently asking ourselves, or if I may use common and popular Kenyan phrase, in whose hands are we safe? Now, not only does this affect the victim psychologically, but it also keeps them in that specific state of trauma, whereby even if as the NGOs come in and try and help out with trauma therapy, they are unable to move from their age when they first experienced trauma. And what happens is, because in your mental state, you want to keep silencing the specific evils of that day or that night, then you may not be able to notice that you are charging onto normal everyday citizens. Now, if we may move again to killing and maiming, again, there have been a lot of accusations of this being used as a method of ethnic cleansing. Why this is so is because a lot of these perpetrators would want to finish a particular side that they are fighting, and ensuring that only their side takes control of that specific society that they're in. Now, in the African setup, using African traditions, we realize that when it comes to persons of disabilities, they are not valued in most of these societies, and most of the times are excommunicated and left to fend on their own. Now, this being used as a method of war ensures that not only, again, is the family setup being destroyed, but that there is no hope being given that these perpetrators will be brought to book. Now, when it comes to the recruiting and use of child soldiers, this is a specific, if we may call it, pandemic that is currently being witnessed in the continent. A lot of these children who are being recruited into these armies and fighting into war, most of the times have done so involuntarily. Why this is so is, for example, you have bandits who come in and raid a specific community, take both boys and girls and take them to the field. Boys who will now be recruited and trained as child soldiers, while the girls are being used and trained as cushion givers, if I may use that word. why this, again, we would like to put it as a pandemic. Not only do we see it as a horrible situation at this specific point in time, but also its effects in future. A very good effect of this that we may see in our current adulthood, if we may put it that way, is gender-based violence. There is a current, I do not remember where the study is from, but during my time as a first, second year at the university, we got an opportunity to be able to work on matters gender-based violence. And for about a month or so, we were not making headway. That is until the men in our group one time were able to go and sit down with other men and have a drink. And while these men were drunk, they opened up about being child soldiers and being sexually harassed when they were young. Now that opened up a whole Pandora's box, if we may put it that way, because we were now able to understand that this men who we were currently calling perpetrators of GBV were now vulnerable and opening up about how they were sexually abused when they were young, some as young as 7 years old, by both men and women, and they were not able to handle that trauma. And because they are in the current peaceful setup in the sense that there is no war, there is no guns, that they do not, they are not able to control or silence the mental guns. And what this did is a lot of them who ended up getting married did not realize, both the man and his wife did not realize the triggers that took them back to the specific situations. We also found out that these certain triggers were normal everyday sentences. And once the wives were able to, that trigger, the men would go back into that age, whether 9, 10 years old, they would sink into the 9, 10-year-old, and they would end up fighting whoever was taking advantage of them. Now, because we did not know that beforehand, all we saw was gender-based violence. But when they were vulnerable enough and opened up, we now saw this man as the 9, 10-year-old. And that way we were able to include them in rehabilitation programs, trauma therapy and healing, and the gender-based violence cases reduced by almost 50% within a month. That was just, I think, that was just by the way. But what I learned from that is that a lot of what we call problems today may actually be reactions to problems. Okay, we're moving on to the next slide. Okay, so when it comes to the role of the youth in implementing and voicing out this human rights, we have certain dockets that we may support in the African Union. The first and the major one is the African Union Office on Peace and Security, Council and Political Affairs. And we also have the Silencing of the Guns Initiative. Now, what this usually does is, what we could do for them and assist them is provide psychosocial support. Mental health is a tough topic, to be honest. Mental health is a tough topic to deal with. Not only are people afraid of opening up, there's also the fear of, if I open up to someone, like, are they going to laugh at me? Are they going to laugh at me? Are they going to ridicule me? This is a very good example, especially when it comes to sexual abuse. We are very afraid of bringing that up, particularly if we may dare say it, men are not able to come forth and say that they have been sexually abused, not only because of the childhood training of not being able to open up, but also the fear of other men laughing at them. This leads to men sinking into depression, and depression does not only mean keeping quiet and pushing yourself at the end of the room. It may also manifest as addiction, drug addiction. It may manifest as violence, and it may manifest as anger. Now, if we are able to provide psychosocial support at silencing not only the physical but the mental guns, then we are halfway there. When it comes to supporting of local schools and communities, I would like to give more emphasis in schools and communities that are currently housing refugees and former child soldiers. Why this is so, it is very scary to be different in a particular community. And I would dare say that Kenya is a very good example, Kenya and Uganda, who are currently hosting a lot of refugees. And it is very scary coming into a country, completely different language, completely different culture, and you are from war. So you have to deal with the trauma of being in transit from war to a physically peaceful setup, and now having to deal with the mental excruciating pain of having to find new friends, having to fit into a society that may not want to, and having to keep quiet because you may be too scared of alarming the particular society's security forces. So as we provide support to local schools and communities, not only are we doing it in the sense that we want to make them feel welcome, but we also want to make them feel home. Specific simple examples would be having a cultural day for this specific community. So for example, in Uganda, if you are hosting refugees from Congo, so you could have a Congo traditional day where these refugees come, they sing their folklore, they enjoy their specific kind of food, they are able to watch plays or enjoy music or public TV with you, just to make them feel that you are one of us. Not only does that go a long way in helping them feel included and in cultural orientation, but it also eases their mental state. When it comes to civic education is particularly to the citizens of the community, of the host community. Why this is so, there are certain states that may not be able to understand the issue of refugees. I remember when we were starting this kind of topics, and I realized, although I could be wrong, I realized that, for example, a lot of people from Botswana were not particularly aware of what is going on in the conflict situation. Now, when I say particularly aware, I don't mean what someone goes ahead and reads or educates themselves on. No, I mean what is actually happening in the field. And it's only then that, because Botswana is deemed as a relatively peaceful country, and when you look around this particular states that are very, if I may say in Kiswahili, chap chap when it comes to these issues of refugees, a lot of their neighbors are experiencing war. And so what happens is, as you are providing civic education and understanding local, regional, and international war, you're also coming in and saying, this is actually what happens to the person. Not only am I coming in and saying, hey, do you know about the Africa platform on children affected by conflict? Do you know what the ECOWAS court determined in this situation? Not only are we talking about that, but you're also coming in and saying, wow, the trauma that comes from genocide, the trauma that comes from ethnic cleansing, the trauma that comes from experiencing war, it looks like this. The refugees talk like this. This is why they sleep a lot. Europe, for example, is dealing with that, the mental health trauma of now having to host citizens. One morning you wake up and you're now hosting citizens. We now have the resignation trauma. For those who may not be aware what the resignation trauma is, the resignation, I forgot the name, the resignation syndrome. Now, for those who are not aware what the resignation syndrome, if I may bring it to life, what happens is these children who have experienced trauma deteriorate their life, not necessarily dying, but it deteriorates. So it starts out as the child being in the room, not talking. It goes to them dozing off, for a few minutes, for a few hours, and then completely being in a sleep-like state. So they are alive, they're breathing, they may be aware of what's happening in their surrounding, but they are asleep. They're not moving, they're not talking, they're not doing anything, they're just asleep. And what doctors, psychologists found out is these children, because of the trauma, they are not able to reconcile their physical being and what they saw at that particular point in time. So these children remove themselves from this particular state we're in to protect themselves from having witness that again. So far, we have not had any official cases of that in Africa, but we have seen the reactions to this specific trauma, such as children not wanting to go home, sitting at the end of the room, just quiet, crying a lot, being fidgety. And yes, social media engagement, we put their Twitter spaces, hashtags, and video content. Currently, TikTok is doing a great job at teaching a lot of Africans on this specific subject, not only when it comes to legislation, but talking about the mental health awareness, how to deal with childhood trauma, how to help fellow refugees in your community, and how to educate yourself more so that you, as you go about your day-to-day lives, that you don't end up offending or returning someone to the specific traumatic state that they were in. Okay, we're moving to the next slide. So this part is the question and answer part. I don't think we will be able to do that because this is a pre-recorded session, but I cannot wait to hear from you. Should you have any questions about the lecture, comments, how we can improve this, more topics that we can handle, you can reach me on dumebiolo@gmail.com. My hashtag is HeyDumebiOlo, not hashtag. On Twitter, you can find me on Twitter at HeyDumebiOlo. Okay, so thank you. I think that is it. And I cannot wait to see you next time. Okay, bye.